What's up, everybody? My name is Nelson Thomas. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer of ecoText, and we're here today with Christina Broderick, founder and CEO of IgnitEDU. And we definitely wanted to bring her on and to speak about, as she's an expert and her company's an expert on really providing the modern-day students with the toolbox necessary to be successful as they travel throughout the high school ranks and into university ranks. And we want to try to provide the different teachings and knowledge that she has to our user base, to the students, you guys, so you can take advantage of those, especially during these harsh times where we're having finals week coming up, and students are really starting to deal with the pressures and woes that go along with being a university student, some of the critical aspects of mental health, goal setting, and really prioritizing and focusing on yourself and prioritizing yourself in your studies and otherwise. So definitely wanted to welcome Christina Broderick here today.
Thank you.
To talk through some of these things, man. So, just give us a background about what IgnitEDU is, or IgnitEDU, pardon me, IgnitEDU is, and what you guys look to bring to the educational marketplace.
Yeah, so I started IgnitEDU because I noticed a consistent gap in the educational sphere. So I'm a licensed social worker, I'm a certified school social worker, and I've been working in education for almost a decade. And I've worked in elementary schools, middle schools, high schools, and Big Ten universities. And I noticed there was a consistent gap in terms of the skills that students were learning, not just academic skills or life skills, but just in terms of their mental health. And then being able to be the first person to witness what happens when they don't have those strategies and those skills in place, right? So exam seasons are coming and they're overworking themselves, they're studying like crazy, but they don't know how to take care of their own bodies. So what that looks like is them, running away from you to go throw open trash cans, or they're uncontrollably crying in class, or they're passing out because they haven't been eating well, or they're not sleeping and taking care of their own self.
They're having these bouts of kind of outbursts, if you will, or things that kind of spur up unknowingly to themselves.
Yep, yeah. And it's a mixture of things that they just don't know how to control, or they have real experiences that are happening in their life that they don't know how to address, or they're afraid to address. So they're pushing all of that down, and then all of a sudden, when exam seasons come, or something that's more high pressure, high intensity, like exams, all of it just erupts, right? And now they're just spiraling out of control. And it's unfortunate because they've worked really hard maybe in their semester, and it's very hard for them to recuperate when it comes to that part. Yeah,
no, and that's definitely important when we think about, especially in our capacity as ecoText, and we're trying to really provide this opportunity through affordability for collegiate students to really lessen the load, and part of that stuff is tied into mental health. Part of it is tied into the concept of students having to worry, and I think sometimes we have the privilege of forgetting. At least I had the ability to get student loans, but there's a lot of people also paying their whole way through university, and that can be a lot. That can be a lot for students to deal with in terms of just having to worry about these $300 massive textbooks that they have to now pay for all of a sudden, and out of tuition money and student money they might put away for themselves. So it's all really tied in together.
Yeah, and then they have to do a lot more, right? They're sharing textbooks with people, or they borrowed it maybe only for a certain amount of weeks, and they don't have it now for finals, and because they had to return it back, and now they're stressing about that, right? So there's all of these things that seems very inconsequential when it comes to a textbook, but also how vital it is to the educational experience. Yeah.
So can you tell us about maybe some of your experiences? You talked about being a part of Big Ten universities. Where exactly were you at?
Rutgers University.
Oh, wonderful.
Supporting,
okay, right here.
About 400 first-generation low-income college students there doing program coordination, academic advising, all of that kind of stuff. And that's really where I'm sitting one-on-one with students, and they're repeating classes over and over again, or they're doing the behaviors that I mentioned earlier, and they just don't know what to do, right? Their society says you should do X, or their family says they should do Y, right? But they're sitting here with me face-to-face, and they're very confused, or they think they're on the right path, they think they know what to do, right? But they don't understand why it's not connecting. Yeah.
No, for sure, and kind of give us an idea about what obviously that probably served as a big spark for you in terms of creating IgnitEDU as a source to really help students. But what was really that spark? What was the time where you felt like, okay, this is something I want to go ahead and create?
I'm not sure if there's anything in specific to one instance. I think I was just tired of seeing the fallout and noticing that the students, we're now at this spot where we feel like we're quote unquote too old to have to be going with this stuff. Why didn't anyone teach them this when they were younger?
Yeah.
Right? So even me serving in the capacity of a certified school social worker and working in schools, there's one of me for like 450 students, for example. I can't serve all of them, right? But instead of us waiting, we tend to wait until something happens for them to then address the problem, right? We're waiting for the student to come to the social worker. We're waiting for the student to come to the social services or the counseling services place, right? What are we doing that's more preventative than reactive? And that's kind of what I aim to do, is to be more preventative. Instead of waiting for situations to happen, how are we equipping them with the skills and the abilities to address their mental health before it gets to a point where they need more intensive services.
Yeah, yeah, and that's the preventative needs too. That's really important. Is getting to them and providing them with the toolbox necessary before it gets too far gone, in a way in which kind of giving them the skills necessary to be the best students that they can be, right?
Yep.
So talk to us about some of the curriculums that you come out with. Some of the different workbooks and the textbooks that are made available for people now. Made available actually, through different platforms such as ecoText.
Yeah. So we have 3 pillars. We have the mental health, which is our big foundational one, because we think everything kind of starts with the mind and the mindset. But we also work with students on their academic skills and strategies and financial literacy. Those are kind of the 3 biggies that myself and my other colleagues came together and thought these are the areas that students really need support on, right? So it's not so much for academic strategies of like how you do psychology 101, but how are we working through like metacognition? How are we learning time management? How are we learning the evidence-based study cycle, and how do you actually study, right? People are like, I'm going to study more, but what does that actually look like, and how do you learn that process? So it's a mixture of that in the study strategies and skills. As I mentioned, the mental health, we're going through mindset, resiliency, self-care, stress reduction, all those kinds of things. And then financial literacy, right? I think we all get to a spot when we're out of college and we're older and we're like, why didn't anyone teach us about all of this money stuff? And you're like, oh my God, like how do you do, I mean, even me, like I'm still like learning and undoing some things that I have learned from family, from friends that are just like terrible advice or terrible things to do. So if we can start having students learn that earlier, they're more equipped when they finish school.
I always felt like that was one of the things that the financial literacy part really kind of like makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Granted, because, coming out of school with the student loans and all kind of debt and such that you kind of face as a student. And even while you're in school, having to kind of manage your money in a way, even though it's micro amounts because of broke college students kind of stereotype, but
it adds up.
It adds up.
I had a student who was sitting talking about she's going to Starbucks every single day for tea.
Yeah.
I was like, sis, tea? You can make tea in your dorm with hot water in a tea bag.
The
like,
choices,
you're paying $4 to Starbucks every single day, and like how much that adds up to. And then when she did the math, and then she came back to me a month later, she was like, yo, Miss Broderick, I am saving so much money. I'm like, because it's tea. Why are you paying Starbucks for tea?
Actually, on that note too, I got a really good advice one time about like, okay, you have to make it at home. If you can make it at home, make it at home. And every time you do make it at home, if it costs $4 for tea, every time you make a cup of tea, that costs $4 put into your savings account.
Ooh, that's smart.
And just see how that works out.
I should do
like
that.
That one, eh?
Yeah, I should do that.
Yeah.
So I wanted us specifically today to talk a little bit about, as students are working towards like midterms and finals, how do we start preparing students for that process?
Yeah.
So can you talk to me a little bit about, as a student, what that looks like for you? What does your preparation look like? Starting from, I guess, like the beginning of the semester and then throughout.
Yeah, I've always tried to adopt the model of writing things out, and then creating like that priority list that we kind of talk about what's the most important thing that I need to get done, and seeing it struck out, because that kind of eases my anxiety in a way, just seeing that I'm productively getting things done, but also understanding, okay, if there's something I have big down the line, let me not cram it into 72 hours if I have a project that was a semester-long project, and cram it into 72 hours. Let me take the time to work on it half an hour a day, because there's some projects too, for myself, just being completely honest, that are tedious and they're annoying,
they're boring.
they're boring, not really interested in it, and I gotta get it done. So even taking just half an hour bites out of it really helps me out. So I've really adopted a model of just writing things into a journal, or writing things into my agenda rather, and really focusing on what do I need to get done in that moment, and just taking it one step at a time. I figure when you're able to do that and really see the list of things, it becomes less overwhelming, and as you strike through, it almost becomes a little bit more gratifying for you to see that how much stuff you're getting done.
Yeah. And sometimes I even encourage students so when we kind of start at the beginning of the process, right, it's looking at what kind of student do I want to be, right? Do I want to be the student that's cramming and constantly stressed, or do I want to be the student who kind of feels more relaxed and I feel like I have things like more balanced and in place? And that's important to start when you are a student, because as you get older and all the adult stuff starts like kicking in, like it gets crazy, right? It gets crazy. So how are you learning to build this skill set when you are a student, right? So you can call it different things. So people can say it like goal setting, you can call it intention setting, you can call it what just like journey do I want to be on, right? I've started to adopt the mindset of looking at it more as a journey than of just like a goal, because sometimes it feels more finite when you think of it as a goal, right? Cool, I want to like I want to get a C in bio, and then like that's it. But like when you think of it on a journey, there's all these kind of things that you learn on that process, right? And also on journeys, they're not always straight, right? You may have to turn back around and go in a loop, or maybe you might have to go up and then down, right? That's what's going to happen when you're on this journey, that it's not linear. So when you kind of think of it in that mindset, you can help yourself feel a little more positive and optimistic about what may come down the road, right? You can make the list and you make all that stuff, but then things happen. Things get thrown into your way. You get a wrench in your plans. And then you're like, oh my God, I meant to do this, and then I can't do this, and oh my God, and everything starts to build up, and then you start getting anxiety, and then you start feeling overwhelmed, and then it just kind of snowballs from there, right? And that's kind of starting from when you're just like, well, I had this one goal, and I didn't accomplish that goal. It's hard for me to do this like goal because it's like my finite end solution, versus starting from the beginning and saying, well, what do I want to be? What kind of journey do I want to be on, and moving in that way? Does that make sense?
No, that makes total sense. I think that's really good statement to take back for the viewers, is that, you know, by doing the different steps in that way, it really frees you up, because I feel like college is a time to kind of to explore and figure out and shoot all the shots that you can, so you really know what you like and don't like. You know, it'd be a real shame. I got this advice from somebody actually the other day. It was like, you know, it'd be a real shame for you to go through all of school, you know, and then go through your MBA program only to realize that you don't like business. You know? And I think if prioritizing and kind of give you a lot more time to, it not only increases your efficiency, but it gives you a lot of time to take in, okay, what do I like? Let me get that internship. Let me apply here. Let me take on different things. Let me take on different challenges. Let me volunteer, bolster my resumes and such, instead of, you know, not doing that. You seem so overwhelmed and crammed, and then you don't feel like you have enough time to do things.
And it's interesting because I think that's what society tells us we need to do, right? I think it's bizarre that at 17, 18, you should pick the career path for the rest of your life. Like, I don't even know what I want to eat for dinner tonight. Like, I already pick my career path, you know? But that comes with that pressure. And I think when you start adding things, and the news is talking about, pick this major, and this is what the economy is saying, so you should go in this direction, and you end up maybe being more money focused, right? What am I going to earn? And I need to make sure that I can pay my loans back and like all that stuff, versus like, I'm going to start with my values. What do I value? And what type of things can I do that'll help like feed my values?
Almost working backward from the traditional method in which we've almost been kind of conditioned into.
And it's hard. And I know there's tons of people that completely disagree with that, and are like, that's why you end up like poor and whatever, right? But I think even in that, if you're following your values and you're following your intuition and letting that guide you, I don't think you will, right? I think it allows you to be more optimistic, more creative, more driven, because you're working from that space. When you're working from like, I need to get this grade so I can get this degree, so I can get this job, so I can make this money, right? It's very extrinsically motivated versus being intrinsically motivated. When you're intrinsically motivated to do something, you're going to work harder. You're going to work smarter. You're going to make sure you get to where you're looking to go, because you're working from that point of view versus working from an extrinsic motivation like money or status or something like that.
And it's fleeting. Like that equals out to almost burnout. And you know, I feel like the way to avoid burnout is doing something that you really feel passionate about. And you know, almost that kind of notion of you know, ending up poor, whatever the case may be, it just relates back to that success, and one's personal success is all subjective feeling, right? It's all subjective concept. To others is you know, monetary value and you know, acquisitions and things that are tangibly acquired through, you know, whatever kind of job you were able to have right after college, or the case may be. But to others, it's about maybe doing the kind of work we're doing, you know, doing the work that brings value to other people, creating a system and businesses that are able to increase conscious capitalism and really affect change in the industries that we look to affect. It ain't changing. It so happens we want to do that in education and education technology. But, you know, that's kind of a subjective feeling. And, you know, kind of parlaying to mental health a little bit, I feel that's kind of where we get stuck up, in a way as people. We can kind of look online and see, oh, this person's doing that and this person's doing whatever. But you got to realize everybody's running their own race.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting with which I'm just kind of thinking about now, is the mental health arena, is that like the intentions are there to kind of like increase the awareness about mental health, destigmatize and stuff like that. But I think somewhere things have gotten very convoluted, right? So even when people think about things like self-care, right, they think I need to like have bubble baths and put on face masks and get a pedicure and get massages and like that's kind of it. But no one's really digging. People are. I shouldn't say nobody is. You don't really see enough like people really unpacking what self-care is for each person, right? Just essentially putting you first in whatever space that means. That could mean whether it's saying no to an event. That can mean like saying yes to something that really like fulfills you, right? Whatever that is for you, that's kind of what it is. It's taking care of yourself in any way that definition makes sense to you. So in that, can you speak to, as a student, what are some things that you do to incorporate your values, your journey, self-care, stuff like that into your routines?
Yeah, so I'll kind of break it up into two parts. So to kind of speak directly about the mental health aspect and kind of self-care aspect, I've been fortunate in university, and I've really had a self-initiative to take on a lot of things during my time there, which I think has worked for me very well because I found a lot of things that I'm passionate about. And in those moments, though, some of those days can get very hectic, although it's exciting, but they can get very hectic, I try to just take moments to do little things that bring me a lot of joy. So whether it means waking up a little extra early so I can listen to my favorite podcasts, whether it means, when I get home, having, one of my favorite beverages. Sometimes those little things really add up into big things, So if, you feel like you're hectic, so just try to incorporate I found success in just incorporating little things that you can bring you a moment or two of just like, calmness and joy in what you're doing at that moment, to help yourself throughout the day, especially if it's getting very hectic. So whether it be, grinding a cup of coffee, even though we kind of spoke earlier, but, say right that day, I need that chai latte or something. Please don't necessarily bar yourself of that joy. Yeah. And then the second part of your question.
Just how do you incorporate like your values and your journey as you're kind of moving through the different spaces as a student? Yeah, so
the way I kind of did that is that I knew from when I got to university I wanted to be involved in a lot of things. Initially being a student athlete, I knew I had a platform. So I was always really passionate about giving back. And as I was going through and became more and more passionate about mental health, that's when I started those kind of initiatives on my campus. And I really wanted to start things and be a part of things, and that's how I got involved with ecoText as well, because I was a fellow student, and we can all attribute to this fact that as a company that we all were in the same boat of going into the bookstore, seeing the price of textbooks and walking right out because they were something that we couldn't afford. Me personally, that was something I could not afford, so I chose not to buy them. And you find that to be the case with a lot of college students. So through that same similar story that we all had, really birthed this company. And in that way, when I got approached to be a part of this company, it was very exciting for me to get on board with, and almost was a no-brainer because I always wanted to try to get involved in things that I personally cared about. So it really came from an inner feeling of knowing what I wanted to do and how I wanted to do that. And the way I kind of thought through that process, especially as a young student, was just taking the time to talk and broaden my horizons. Having conversations with people who necessarily weren't a part of the sports team at University of New Hampshire. Taking the moment to strike up conversations with other students as you were studying for exams or, different cases like that, and see where you connect and kind of see through those conversations what got me going, what made me feel passionate and excited. And then kind of going from there. So it's definitely a process, and in all good things, they take time. But really taking advantage of the melting pot that you have when you're in school, I think is absolutely critical. And if you don't do so, I think you're doing yourself a disservice of your education, because that might actually bode to be more valuable than the A's and B's or whatever the case may be, all A's that you get through your classes for sure. Yeah.
And there's two big things I think that I'm pulling out from you is. So with self-care, there's two types of self-care, right? There's what's called sustainable self-care and rescue self-care. Rescue self-care is the self-care that you do when you're already burnt out, right? When things have already like gone awry and you're already overwhelmed and you're stressed, and you kind of turn to binging Netflix, or you may turn to a glass of wine or whatever, right? Or a bottle of wine.
Who knows?
Yeah, right? How crazy it is. But that's what's called like rescue self-care, things that you're already doing and you're burnt out. What we want to aim towards is the more sustainable self-care practices. So things that you're doing consistently that help keep you balanced, and making sure you're incorporating that into your schedule, right? As a student, you don't want to wait until midterms or finals, and that's when you're kind of starting, you're like, oh my God, I got to start doing things for myself because I'm really overwhelmed and like stressed. Because that can cause you more stress, right? And I know that because that's usually me. I'm like, I need a self-care plan. I need to like whatever. So in that same breath, that kind of speaks to the next point of intentionality. I think being very intentional about the things that we're doing, the things that we're thinking, things that we're feeling, all together help us feel more fulfilled and feel more balanced and quote unquote happier, right? Because if we're being intentional about the things that we're attending, right, as you're kind of mentioning, the people that we're talking to, the spaces that we're in, how we're spending our time, how we're using our just own personal energy, it allows us to incorporate these things in a more seamless way than feeling like it's another chore that we need to do. When it's connected to your values, when it's connected to your purpose, it helps in that space. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. And that's some of the, you can kind of take us through some of those mental health teaching also that are within your curriculums. Is that's something that's a part of it too. That's
a whole chapter. There's a whole chapter on student self-care, right? Okay. We're breaking that down. We're helping you understand the different spaces of self-care, right? How there's personal, there's academic, there's environmental, there's social, right? All these different spaces. But then we're helping you also build a wellness plan for yourself, right? What are things that you care about, and how can we start, as you're mentioning, like slowly build this into your life, right? Now you're not trying to do everything at one time, right? That's just really overwhelming. But how can we start with the small things, right? Start with the easiest, smallest amount of things, right? If you want to work out more, but like you're really struggling with that, maybe you're just going to set your alarm clock. That's it. Maybe you go back to sleep. Please set your alarm clock, right? That was just like step one. And you're slowly starting to incorporate that. But the important part is being able to move towards more sustainable self-care practices. It's good to have a toolbox of rescue, right? Because things will happen and you will get overwhelmed. And it's important to know what to reach to when you need that. Obviously, things that are more healthy than unhealthy. But being able to have a really strong, sustainable self-care plan is important. We go through mindfulness practices, why mindfulness is important for students. There's tons of research on the benefits for students in terms of increased academic performance, reduced anxiety and depression, better relationships with their peers, decreased conflict resolution, right? All these things are really important that they've tested on students, and the importance of mindfulness. So we explain what mindfulness is, and then as well as strategies to practice mindfulness and how you can start doing this every day, right? It's not always the big meditation stuff where you need to sit down and put on headphones and like meditate. That's more of the formal practice, but there's informal things, right? How are you just taking in your surroundings? If you're walking to class, right, pop your headphones off and just look at things around you. Find something that's green.
That's something I got to start doing.
Find something that's green, something that's blue, something that's red, right? Because what it's doing is helping your brain focus on the present. We often live in the past and in the future. We don't really live in the present often. Right. And because of that, we end up being more anxious, right? Or we end up feeling maybe more overwhelmed or negative and stuff like that. But we're missing all of the great things that are happening around us because we're living in the past and in the future. So our workbook helps guide students through this process. And it's a workbook because there's spaces in there for you not only to reflect, but also to create some action. So it's a guide for action.
I think that's really important, but you're living in the present, because I think that's really what induces an anxiety. At least I can speak from personal experience, just keep worrying about what's going to happen, what may not happen. And although sometimes it can be a motivational driving force when used correctly, but I feel like some students don't harness that emotion properly. And unfortunately, they find out and get into these episodes of constantly worrying instead of focused on what's actually in front of them, whether it be relationship-wise, academic-wise, opportunities, or things that are taking part. And that kind of leads back, to where I've kind of developed it within university is just that list. Just us seeing stuff written out sometimes just really helps. And making track of the agendas and things. So different habits like that. What kind of habits from your experience have you developed to be most successful for students while they're in school, whether it be, the kind of what I spoke about using a journal, but what other kind of habits are that students can take advantage of to help them prioritize and compartmentalize their studies?
Before I answer that, I think it's important to note, so the first chapter of our book is called like what is mental health, because it's important to also note that there's a difference between just like mental health and mental illness, right? So even though we're speaking of things of like anxiety,
That's a really good distinction.
Yeah, even though we're speaking of things about anxiety and depression, for a lot of people, like it's real and it is diagnosed and they need additional support and resources. So what we typically cover are things that are more like baseline, right? People that aren't at the point where it is a diagnosable like mental illness. However, we do talk about what that process is like and understanding that difference, right? Because when people say things like, oh, I have mental health, or they have issues, or they have like mental health, or we all have mental health, right? Just like we all have physical health. Sometimes we're more healthy than others, right? Sometimes we're healthy and unhealthy. So it's kind of looking in that space. So first making that distinction. So for people that are kind of like more on that baseline, I think part of it also is always starting with just like how are your mindset on stuff, right? If you don't think there's anything to change, if you don't think there's anything wrong, then this is a whole waste.
Yeah.
Right? If you think everything's fine and dandy and great, then it's everything that we're going to talk about and we're going to work through together is a complete waste. And I've been with students like that, right? Where they're like, this is fine. I'm okay. I got this. I'm like, okay.
Have you noticed that's like an ego thing?
Definitely.
Or that's definitely the ego talk?
Definitely an ego talk. It's a mixture of ego. Sometimes it's embarrassment, right? Coming out in that way. They're afraid to show a weakness, right? So it's an embarrassment. So that's that. But if a student's like ready and willing and they're like, I want to make a change, I want to do something different, I'm noticing like all of these different things that are happening. Usually my first step is kind of what you're saying, right? Is they're usually overwhelmed because they have so many things going on and they don't know how to fix it, right? So we start with like a blank schedule. I need you to start with like your commitments that don't move, right? Your class time is not going to move. Your executive meeting is not going to move, right? And then how are we from then, before we start adding in all the rest of the stuff of like study schedule and homework or whatever, what matters to you? What fulfills you? What makes you happy? Where are we going to put this into your schedule? Before we add in all the extra stuff, right? We have to keep classes in there. We have to keep the non-negotiables in there.
Yeah.
But then we're going to start with you and what matters to you and put that into your schedule, right? Do you really enjoy those times where you get to sit on your couch and like catch up on like the latest season of You? Cool. We're putting that into your schedule.
Yeah. Oh, that's
and
cool.
And the ability to do that guilt-free. That you're not sitting there watching You and you're like, oh my God, I should be studying right now. No, I've built this into my schedule that this is my time to do that.
Yeah.
Right? And honoring that for yourself.
I think that's a really good takeaway.
Yeah. And then from there, then you kind of start adding on those stuff, right? If I'm working, if I know I have this exam coming up or this project coming up, how am I allocating that into my schedule? I'm putting pen to paper. I think often because we're in this digital age, people put them on all these different things. There's a very different visual experience you have when you look at a schedule. And one, sometimes people think they have a lot going on, but then when we put it on paper, they see so much empty space.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh. I'm like, well, what are you
Like,
doing?
wait a moment.
What are you
Yeah,
doing?
exactly.
Like,
Yeah.
Well, I mean, sometimes I'm at the cafeteria for like 4 hours with my friends because we had lunch and then we kind of just like kicked it for like 4 more hours, right? So some of it is just facing the reality of like what actually is happening, but sometimes it is. Sometimes they have overcommitted themselves, right? Which I get. I'm a huge overcommitter. That is part of my work and my journey is to stop doing that.
Yeah.
But then being able to say, okay, we know what we have overcommitted ourselves to. Is there anything that we can take a step back from? Not permanently, right? Maybe it's just a shifting of delegation of tasks. Hey, I really need to like focus on X, like secretary, do you think you can help me with like Y?
Yeah.
Right? And being able to do that. Because right now, none of it's going to function well if you're not okay.
True.
You're not going to get good grades. You're not going to do well on your clubs. You're not going to do all that stuff if you are not well, right? So being able to start with you and making sure you're making decisions that are based on your values and your needs and moving from there is important.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that point about delegation, if you have the opportunities and the luxury to be able to do that, then definitely take advantage. 'Cause that's part of, just being a part of a team. Speaking about the team of ecoText too, and just our story is, we're constantly leaning on one another as a young startup to help one another in our process of growing this company. Even though, I serve as chief marketing officer, doesn't mean I'm not necessarily in different financial discussions. You know what I mean?
Right.
So it's delegating of tasks and having one another's back. Is definitely very important, but also the aspect of not overcommitting either, because you definitely want to be able to do things to the best of your ability.
Yeah.
And I think when people realize too, it kind of is a double-edged sword though, because I was definitely somebody who's taken on a lot, and I think people when writing things out and see that kind of open space, realize that like, okay, if I operate more efficiently, maybe if I spend 2 hours in the dining hall rather than 4,
Yeah.
then I won't feel necessarily so overwhelmed about, my nightly study. So sometimes it's about a shift of habit.
Yeah.
And oftentimes, if you do kind of do those different habits that we're talking about, writing things down and really seeing things visually about what X Y Z I have to get done, you realize you kind of might have more time on your hands to do things
Yeah.
and sometimes part of it is working on projects and initiatives and things that, although in the moment might be a lot of work, ultimately it can be some of the most rewarding stuff you feel, and that in terms of really building your own personal feeling of self-worth and such. So yeah. So I want to thank Christina Broderick, founder and CEO of IgnitEDU, for talking with us today, really providing students with insights and our user base with insights about how they can be more productive students in college and how they can really take care of themselves and really enjoy their time while they're in school, not only in a way which is really beneficial for them as they get out of school and setting themselves up for success.
Yeah.
So
Thank you, and I thank you for having me, and I encourage your viewers to take a look at our workbook.
Yes, please.
So that they're able to do this themselves, as well as being able to have access to us, me and my company, in case they need extra assistance, that we're able to help work them through this process, just kind of like how we did. That's kind of what it would be similar to.
Yeah, and so where can we find you?
So you can purchase our workbooks on our site. So it's igniteedu.net /online-store or on the ecoText platform.
Wonderful, guys. Definitely go and cop one of these workbooks. It was definitely a major help for you guys as you guys push through this final season, these last few months in school. And again, thank you so much for being a part of this talk
course.
today.
It was
There's a lot
great.
of value. Thank you.
Thanks.